So, what a shit show the Steelers and Lions were, right?
I'll tell you, it was fun to watch them actually like sabotage themselves. Having Mason Rudolph and Ray McLeod as your focal points to Najee Harris for 90% of the game. How can you be that insane that you wouldn't just pound it at the Lions until they gave up, right?
Oh, that hurts so bad. And I mean, aside from that, it was just so sloppy. Like the holding call that called back Najee's touchdown,
Mhm.
the the terrible field goal from the Lions to like win the game. It's like nobody wanted to win this game, and nobody deserved to win that game. But it was wild.
I got to think that you have to, as Steelers fans right now, like I really thinking there's so many Steelers fans out there, so many that follow us, right? Like I really think you shouldn't be allowed to talk for like a week. Like I don't want
No,
to hear from y'all anymore. I don't want to see you guys talking about how great your team is. 5-3-1. We're all going to remember that one, and it was the friggin' Lions. It was the Lions. This is like the Bills losing to Jacksonville. It's embarrassing. Like I don't care that it's not a loss, it is a loss and it's a shame. And the fact that you had Najee pulling a Donovan McNabb not knowing that the game's over is spectacular. It
it
was
was
just
just
a mess.
awful. It was so bad. And didn't that happen to the Steelers a few years ago where they were the only tie of the year and it was some terrible, atrocious team?
Yeah, it's just kind of what they do. It's becoming their brand. I mean, there's that. There's pinning their hopes on an overweight quarterback, and there's disappointing Mike Tomlin year in and year out is kind of their brand now, I think.
Yeah. And I mean, who are they going to get? Because Rudolph's not the answer. Dwayne Haskins, somebody came out and said he was uh, a lack of effort or just straight lazy today in practice. So they got some problems.
Yeah, they talked about him in warmups being on his phone instead of getting ready. He was one hit from actually getting into an NFL game for the first time in I don't know how long, and I guess he's just disinterested. But I
Yeah.
guess that happens when you know you're not going to be good whether you get in or not. So you might as
And
well make sure you get the IG time in.
yeah, might as well. All right, you ready to kick this off?
Yeah, we might as well. We're here, right?
Yeah, let's do it.
This is Fantasy Intervention. Now here to intervene with your fantasy life, Chase Vernon.
Hey guys, thanks for joining us. Despite what the intro video says, Chase is out living his best life tonight. But I am here, Britt Flinn, and I have a very special guest with me tonight, Mike, aka at Daddy's Home FF. How's it going?
Oh, it's going. It's going. How you doing?
I'm so good. So, yeah, first show hosting, like I'm stoked, I'm ready. There's so much to talk about. Like I'm ready to
You,
jump on this.
you sure? You sure? Because
Yeah,
we're gonna make a mess of this. I'm bringing friends to the chat. We're gonna get this is gonna get ugly quick.
I love it. I love
Good.
mess.
That's what we're gonna do. It's week 11. I mean, the whole
Love
waiver wire is a
mess.
mess. So let's do it.
Perfect. So all of you guys watching, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us. Shout out to Fantasy Football Discussion. If you have not watched this show before, we kind of have a different waiver wire setup than most other shows. We start out with a no shit section, like no shit, you should pick these people up, right? Then we go into an avoid section, like all these people at this point in the year, shouldn't really have any fab left, but if you do, you shouldn't blow your fab on them or lose your waiver priority if that's all you have left. And then at the end, we cover some of our gems, some of those players who aren't being talked about, who we think could win you a matchup and kind of help you out down the road. So, if you're ready to get started, Mike, let's start with our no shit quarterbacks. And first off, I have Cam Newton. How do you feel about Cam going into week 11?
Cam Newton, man. Well, first of all, great story. Absolutely great story that he goes back to Carolina, somehow gets himself like 2017 Cam money for a team that, if you look at their schedule, has virtually no chance of making the playoffs. But we have a good story here. And what we have, as you know, is a quarterback who's now going up against the Washington football team who can't stop anybody. What's interesting about Cam, though, is we always want to look at basically how these teams produce against opposing players. And Washington is terrible, absolutely terrible against quarterbacks, giving up 22 touchdowns on the year. But does that matter for Cam? I mean, what we saw last year in New England, the man can't throw. I mean, let's just call it what it is. Since the shoulder injury, he can't throw. His weapons are no better, save for Christian McCaffrey on Carolina. So the question is, how much weight do we put into how Washington does against quarterbacks when it comes to Cam Newton this week?
So you're absolutely right on that. Cam's ADOT has gone down every single year since 2016. It's just steadily decreased. But where I think his value lies is in Christian McCaffrey. He can dump off to Christian McCaffrey in those short little ADOT throws. He's got this rushing upside. And I don't think there's anybody on Washington's defense who can guard that tandem. Plus, Chase Young and Montez Sweat are both out. So as bad as they were against the quarterback, they lost two key pieces of their pass rush who won't be there this week. As far as upcoming schedules go with Cam, we mentioned he's versus Washington, then he's at Miami, then a bye, then at home against Atlanta, at Buffalo, Tampa, and New Orleans. So if you're kind of looking for a streamer, if your team is kind of sound, I like Cam just because of his rushing upside. I mean, he was in for 12% of the snaps this week and got a rushing touchdown and a passing touchdown. And P.S., does that make Robbie Anderson relevant? Spoiler alert. We'll talk about that down below.
I think with Cam, I think you hit the nail on the head, though, that realistically, Cam Newton is a nice streamer this week. And I see Troy's in the chat. He's also a great play against a terrible Miami Dolphins team, absolutely horrific Miami Dolphins team. So I love him for those two plays. Atlanta, obviously, you play anybody. A corpse could go for 300 against Atlanta, but this is not a viable player for the playoffs. Buffalo, Tampa, New Orleans, I want nothing to do with Cam Newton come playoff time. So if you're picking him up, realize that it's only 3 out of the next 4 weeks you're playing him, but he should not be someone that you rely on come playoff time because he's probably going to have a very difficult time in those 3 games.
Yep, I agree. But another quarterback who is in the no shit section, who has rushing upside and is a little iffy, is Justin Fields. So Chase and I brought this up last week, and somebody commented, Fields sucks. Like, okay, sure, he might as a real life player, but as this is fantasy, and we want somebody who can produce in fantasy. Fields can do that with his legs. I mean, he put up 148 rushing yards in his past 2 games. So how do you feel about Justin Fields?
Justin Fields sucked. Past tense. He had a very rough start to his career. We can call it adjustment for a rookie. We can call it the Matt Nagy effect. We can call it the fact that Allen Robinson doesn't even actually want to play football anymore. There's a lot to look at from the start of Justin Fields' career and have concern. But what we saw in his previous 2 weeks leading up to the bye was a totally different quarterback, a more confident player, someone who was much more decisive, somebody who basically looked at the defense, got a better read on it. This man ran for 100 yards and a touchdown against a really decent San Francisco offense. He threw for almost 300 against Pittsburgh. And what he did, which is my favorite part, is he finally opened up Cole Kmet, a player that I love, a player that I've loved since preseason. So Justin Fields, if you're still claiming in the chat that Justin Fields sucks, you probably stopped watching after 3 weeks. And I don't blame you. It's the Bears. But take a look again. This is a different player, and this is the guy that I think that basically people were pining for as a top 3 pick at the beginning of the year. You're starting to see that talent. And like you said, that rushing floor in and of itself will keep you in games. And that's really what you're looking for off the waiver wire at this point of the year. all the gold is gone. Like, it's been picked. So you're looking for somebody who can get you through bye weeks. We have a lot of big time quarterbacks coming up on buys, Brady, Rodgers, to name a few. We have a bunch of people that are going to need those fill-ins, and that rushing floor is so valuable. You look at, basically, for me, I use Carson Wentz as a fill-in this week, a guy who doesn't run, and he was straight trash. He killed me this week because I didn't get those quick 5 to 11 points just from him carrying the ball. So I think Fields a perfect pickup, and I think realistically you need to take another look at Justin Fields as potentially being a guy you can use in the playoffs. The almost opposite of what we said with Cam Newton. This guy's a cakewalk schedule, and if he figures it out, he could be a league winner this year.
I agree with that. Everything you said. I think the rookie's kind of gotten out of his trepidation, and I think he's ready to go down the stretch. Before we get into running backs, let's answer a couple of these questions that are in the chat. Scott Thomas says, Scott, thoughts on Van Jefferson the rest of the season? With Woods out and Odell's history of failure, any chance he surprises as a solid wide receiver too?
No. Sorry, if LQ's watching. I know LQ's a huge Van Jefferson fan. I think realistically, you do not go out. I think you don't get Odell Beckham. You don't get him to sign if this isn't someone that you've promised to get target share. I think when you look at this team altogether, I think Van Jefferson now becomes possibly the fifth option. Obviously, Cooper Kupp is option 1, 2, and 3. But following that, I think you have Odell Beckham, Tyler Higbee, and Darrell Henderson in some order that are going to be the focal point of this offense. What this leaves for Van Jefferson is realistically, I think, a lot of what you saw last night. You might get a quick 20, 25-yard hitter. He might fall into the end zone, but there's so many other players that have a higher upside, higher target share. I think that the signing of Odell Beckham, even with the Woods injury, does kind of put Van Jefferson hype to sleep for me. A player I liked coming in, a player I'm disappointed I don't think is going to see the ball. But when you look at that lineup, when you look at that roster now, what makes you think they're going to focus on Van Jefferson, especially when we're seeing Cooper Kupp's going to get 12 to 15 targets a game? There's only so much to go around, and you know Odell Beckham was promised a piece of that pie.
Yeah, I think by what we saw last night that Higbee is going in as more of a pass catcher. And Van Jefferson had a lot of drops last night. That's not somebody I really want to put my confidence in going down the stretch into the playoffs. Jamie Pirogue, I hope I pronounced that correctly, is Rager droppable yet? I think that's a resounding yes. But what do you think?
First of all, shout out Jamie, someone who has been supporting the Fantasy Intervention shows for a while now. Always love seeing him in the chat. Jamie, I feel like this is a question from week 3. What have you been seeing that you've been holding him, brother? It is time for him to go. It's been time for him to go. There's nothing there for you. Jalen Hurts barely throws, and when he does, it's going to be Devonta Smith and Dallas Goedert. Rager's just not a thing. He's done, and there's no way to have him on any of my rosters at this point.
Yep, agreed. All right, we've got one more question from Scott, and then we'll move on to the no shit running backs. I got Fields last week to replace Wentz down the stretch. Tua this week as a streamer and Fields from there on. What are we thinking with that? I'm kind of leaning Fields this week.
Oh, man, that's a tough one. I mean, when you look at the matchup, you have Tua in what's going to be a get-right game against the Jets for who's going to end up not in last place in the AFC East. The Dolphins are going to play to win because they don't own their pick anyway, so who cares? While the Bears do have a fairly difficult, middle-of-the-road-ish Ravens team. So I think realistically, this is a very, do you go for the rushing floor of Fields? Do you go for the Jets floor of Tua? I think I would lead Tua this week, but I do think Fields from here on out, when I look at his schedule, I think that's the guy I'd go with. But it is really close, Scott. This is one of those that I think you're talking about probably for my weekly rankings. You're going to be like 12 and 14. So honestly, a tip ball here is going to make the difference between these two quarterbacks. Very similar. I would go Tua just because the Jets are so pathetic this year.
It is true. And I think, the Jets were pretty decent against the pass if you look at season-long rankings, but they've fallen down to 4th worst against the quarterback. So, yeah, that one's tough. But maybe I'm just concerned about, and we'll kind of get into this in a second, But I'm a little bit worried about how Miami views Tua and his usage going forward. I'm afraid that they won't set him free. But like I said, we'll get into that later. Something that we are going to get into now are our no-shit running backs. So Ramondre Stevenson, rostered in 29.1% of ESPN leagues. How are you feeling about him? Because I feel that we are not on the same page here.
No. Damien Harris was in the walkthrough today. That is horrible news for anybody who's relying on Ramondre Stevenson. When you take a look at what Bill Belichick values, when you take a look at kind of the overall, we look at the flash, right? We look at the box scores, we look at the catches, we look at how good Ramondre looks running the ball. What we don't see is Ramondre is 2 weeks removed from getting Mac Jones killed because he didn't read a blitz properly. We're looking at a guy who's had ball security issues. We're looking at a guy who, when you look at what Belichick values compared to what the fantasy community values, Damien Harris is his guy. What I liken it to is basically when you look at what happens in Seattle, where we're all waiting for Rashad Penny to break out, and basically boring old Chris Carson kept getting rolled out game in and game out by Pete Carroll. That's very much the same with Bill Belichick. You look at Brandon Bolden, looks very good in that third down role. So you're really talking about who's going to get the ball, Harris or Stevenson. I don't think it's going to be a combination of the two. And I think with Harris back from concussion and looking like he's okay, if Harris suits up, I'm staying away from Ramondre Stevenson, and I'm rolling out Damien Harris as the starter of the New England Patriots.
See, I don't disagree with you that Harris poses a problem to Stevenson, but I think going down the stretch that Stevenson has some independent flex value. If he can work on that pass blocking issue that you said, if he can come in, I think it'll be him as the change of pace back, as the pass catching back. And I think, honestly, he's a good handcuff going into the playoffs as well. Even if you don't necessarily put him in your lineup, we've seen with so many players that have gone down. I mean, waivers, if you wait until your player gets hurt, then it's too late. Somebody else is going to scoop up your handcuff. So I think you could start him as a flex, but I definitely want him as a handcuff value.
100%. I mean, I would put him even ahead of the likes of like Alexander Madison at this point. I think what he's shown is he is a high-end Tony Pollard level handcuff. But much like Pollard, I'm hoping you have some better value in your flex spot. If you don't, I agree, roll him out there, but you're probably not a playoff team. I think if you're pulling flex value off the waiver wire right now, these are going to be more stretch plays and more change of situation value type plays at this point. So hopefully you have better than Ramondre, because I do think you're going to have some dry weeks.
Yep. He is. I do agree with you there. He's could be very hit or miss. But somebody else who's not hit or miss and is an essential value pick, and I cannot believe he's only rostered in 58.9% of ESPN leagues, is AJ Dillon. How is he still available in almost half of leagues? I mean,
I don't play in those leagues, obviously.
Right. I mean, every league that I'm in, he was, taken very early. I think people just kind of got a little disappointed with him because they thought the expectations for him were higher than what he delivered. But you didn't draft AJ Dillon to be a starter. You drafted him as a high-end handcuff. And with Aaron Jones going down this week, he's proving just that. I mean, he rushed 21 times for 66 yards and 2 touchdowns. He caught 2 balls for another 62 receiving yards. I mean, the kid's a monster. I absolutely love him. What do you think about AJ Dillon?
It's funny what you talked about with Stevenson. I believe AJ Dillon as your flex, even with Aaron Jones healthy, they've been going back and forth. That drives me crazy. I love Aaron Jones. Aaron Jones is like my guy, absolutely my dude. I love him. But just cheap Mexican today, Clinton. Modelo. I absolutely love Aaron Jones, but AJ Dillon has been Jamal Williams plus. And what we didn't expect from AJ Dillon that we're seeing this year is exactly what we talked about, the pass catching. There was a lot of talk about AJ Dillon not catching passes at Boston College. That's always tough to swallow. It's a different team. Boston College is a primarily run-heavy team, and Dillon ran over opponents in college. So what you're seeing now with the pass catching brings a whole nother dimension to AJ Dillon that he absolutely has standalone value. There is no way he should have been on any waiver wire. I will tell you right now, you want to have a fun name, Britt, let's give him something to talk about. With a healthy Aaron Jones, AJ Dillon still ranks higher than Josh Jacobs for me.
I love that. I absolutely agree with you. I didn't like touching Josh Jacobs. I think that entire backfield's messy. Dillon, I mean, it's Aaron Jones and AJ Dillon. Green Bay brought in, I think, Kerryon Johnson today to work out. I mean, those are the two. There is no running back by committee. These guys are the dudes. If you are fortunate enough to play in a league that still has AJ Dillon on the waivers, for the love of God, scoop him up.
And tell your friends to follow us on Twitter so they don't make those dumb mistakes moving forward. After you pick them up, of course.
Yes. Go get the bag and then tell your friends what you did and how you did it. Speaking about getting the bag, this is somebody that I brought up in the gym section 2 weeks ago. And it's Jeff Wilson Jr. He's still only rostered in 9.2% of ESPN leagues. We got the news today that Elijah Mitchell has a broken finger. They're hoping he can play, but that sounds very coach speaky to me. What do you think?
I'd be shocked if Elijah Mitchell can play with a pin in his finger 5 days later. Very similar, I think, to what we saw from Russell Wilson that put him on, 3 weeks? And obviously it's a different position, but, like you talked about backstage, ball security is huge. And Jeff Wilson, they have a very capable player, someone they have relied on for years, someone that the coach trusts. There's really no reason to put the rookie at risk when you have a healthy Jeff Wilson. I think what is going to be the telltale sign for us, and what I'm personally watching for, is the status of JaMycal Hasty before the game. If JaMycal Hasty gets a clean bill of health, I think that will be a pretty good sign that we're not going to see Elijah Mitchell. But even if you roll out Elijah Mitchell, if the 49ers play him, I can't put him in any of my lineups. He feels like he's a helmet to ball hit away from being done for the game. And Jeff Wilson will be absolute gold. We've seen what this guy can do. We've seen him rip off those 18 for 110 and 2 touchdown games when Raheem Mostert went down. This is a very capable back in a system that just cranks out running back production. You want a piece of this backfield, and Jeff Wilson is the cheapest piece of this backfield you'll ever find. He should have been on your roster already. He should have been on your IR. Why are you wasting time? But if he didn't end up on someone's IR and he is on your waiver wire, he is a smash. If not for this week, at some point, Jeff Wilson will matter in fantasy football.
And we touched on his schedule a couple of weeks ago when he was brought up in the gyms. Week 17, fantasy football championships, they're playing Jacksonville. This is a league winner if I've ever heard of a league winner. Scoop him up now before you get into that playoff push. We do have for sure. I'm still all about him. We do have a question in the chat about start sit questions. Tune in tomorrow. Chase does the start sit show. So look at FF Intervention tomorrow and we can get that answered, but I can privately answer you in the chat. But let's move on to wide receivers. This one, a homer to me, being a Cowboys fan, but I think you have to roster Michael Gallup. The Cowboys eased him back into rotation. His moves look like he hasn't lost a step. How are you feeling about Gallup going forward?
This is another one I'm just shocked is even available. In redraft, you're looking at a guy who is plug and play for your bye weeks. In Dynasty, you're looking at a guy who realistically his value is huge. His contract situation is up this year. There's an opt-out potential on Amari Cooper. Either with Dallas or someone else, Michael Gallup's going to be huge. And you're going to see a piece of that this season. Even with CeeDee Lamb going off, even with Amari Cooper being Amari Cooper, there's plenty of volume in Dallas to go around. And Michael Gallup has shown to be an incredibly talented wide receiver every time he gets the chance. I'm absolutely in love with Michael Gallup. I actually think he might be the second most talented wide receiver on that roster. I think he's a huge play. And I think if he gets 5 to 7 targets, which is what we saw right out of the gate, he will be a wide receiver 3 with wide receiver 1 upside.
Yeah, I absolutely love him. To follow up on the Jeff Wilson, we got a question from Scott. Would you burn a number 1 waiver on Jeff Wilson this week? Yeah.
This slate, absolutely.
I'm in agreement with that as well. Glad we could clear that up. But Gallup's, not only Gallup's talent, but his upcoming schedule is cake at the Chiefs versus the Raiders, at New Orleans, who New Orleans hasn't been great against receivers this year. Like, I hate to tell everybody, but they haven't. Then again, Washington, Giants, Washington, Arizona. Like, even if you don't need to play him this week, grab him and stash him, because he going into these playoffs, and I know I'm going to harp on this over and over and over, he's going to be an asset on your team.
Absolutely. What I love about New Orleans is what they do well is they will take out your wide receiver 1 with Marshawn Lattimore, which most likely will be Amari Cooper. And that game, you can expect Michael Gallup to be either 1 or 2 in targets for Dallas that week.
Yep, absolutely. Well, and the thing with his stat line last week, they pulled everybody in the fourth quarter. So it's kind of a misleading stat line. I think if this game would have been competitive, like next week against the Chiefs or this week against the Chiefs is going to be, he's gonna blow up. Another guy who's kind of weird, and we've talked about him a little bit on the show in previous weeks, is Jamal Agnew. He just really won't go away. He had a dud in Buffalo, but other than that, I mean, even with that dud, he's averaged 13.2 fantasy points per game over the past 5 games. How are you feeling about Jamal Agnew? Do you think that he's just a gadget guy, or do you think that he's a viable wide receiver option going forward?
So this is really, I'm going to kind of half answer the question. I think Jamal Agnew is very much dependent on how deep is your league and whether or not there aren't better options out there. When you look at Jamal Agnew, obviously he hit a big run this week that made his week, or else we would have been looking at a second dud. I mean, he had no catches on 5 targets. He had 3 rushes for 79 yards. This is not Deebo Samuel, where you're going to be able to rely on some kind of rushing floor with Jamal Agnew. It was a play that made me concerned that that's where his production came off of. He had 19 yards rushing coming into the game and picked up 79 against the Colts. He also hasn't seen a huge amount of targets. It's been steady, but different to what we just talked about with Michael Gallup, where I think 5 to 7 targets is enough. 5 to 7 targets isn't enough to me for Jamal Agnew. And part of that comes into just how inefficient Trevor Lawrence has been. This is a guy that really, unless you're playing in a deep, deep league, we're talking like 5 or 6 flex options on top of your standard lineup. There's no way that I'm going to have comfort starting this man. I think you have better options out there in the waiver wire. So I'm going to pass on Jamal Agnew.
I think I'm just in on him because he's making all us Chenault truthers eat our words from the preseason. And so I'm like, instead of taking the L on Chenault, I have to be in on somebody who's taking more of his roll up. Maybe that's just my bias, but I think Agnew can do it going forward. And Meyer honestly doesn't know what to do with this offense other than calling like trick plays or college style plays and whatever. And that's where Agnew has really succeeded so far this season. But we'll see. It's just messy out there. I told you I liked messy.
This is Jamal Agnew is the epitome of messy.
He's very messy. Somebody who's not messy, and I'm really, really happy to see coming along, albeit at the expense of one Allen Robinson, is Darnell Mooney. He's another one. How is he only rostered in under 50% of leagues?
Darnell Mooney's the wide receiver 1 in Chicago. Any wide receiver 1 on an NFL team has huge, huge value. And Darnell Mooney is a game breaker. This is someone who can make or break his game on one play. And what killed us about Mooney was he wasn't consistent before. They weren't able to get him the ball. Last year, we saw his separation was outstanding. His target share and his catchable targets was in the trash, and that has changed considerably this year. I mean, realistically, what are you looking at that you don't think Darnell Mooney belongs on your roster and probably in your starting lineup? Of all the people we've talked about so far, Mooney, with the exception possibly of AJ Dillon, is the most valuable person on this list, and it's not really that close. To get a wide receiver 1 off the waiver wires week 11 is insanity. You should be smashing that every single time. Mooney should be on 100% of rosters.
I'm so in agreement with that. I think maybe the hesitancy on him is just the narrative around Nagy and Justin Fields and the inefficiency of that. But as Fields develops, you've seen it where Mooney's getting targets. He's, like you said, getting the separation. He's getting the touchdowns. Going forward, it's only going to get better. So scoop him up while you can, for sure. Let's rapid fire these tight ends so we can get to these avoids. And then you and I are really going to get into messy and have some fun. All right, Hunter Henry, how do you feel?
I feel like everyone who told me I was an idiot for taking him over Jonnu Smith has been proven to be foolish. This is one of the premier red zone tight ends in the NFL. Absolutely insane that he is on the waiver wire. If he is there, not only should you be picking him up, unless you have Travis Kelce, he would arguably be the best tight end on your roster the second you added him.
A fun fact for all of you guys out there who hate the tight end position, Hunter Henry is currently 3rd overall in scoring in PPR leagues. 3rd. Big Boy Henry, the tight end factory farm here in Arkansas, is number 3 in tight end scoring. Go pick him up. Don't leave him out on waivers. I mean, we're talking about a league winner. Let's go. All right, Tyler Conklin. Another kind of person that you wouldn't expect going into the season, but
yeah, there's a lot of meh in Tyler Conklin. I think the guy we're talking about next is far more interesting. He's fine. I think Tyler Conklin's fine. He becomes one of those de facto tight end ones because there's such garbage down the bottom. But he'll disappear at times. There are times when Jefferson and Thielen, rightfully so, will just dominate the target share, will dominate the red zone targets. So Conklin is a touchdown or a dud. I mean, you could say that about 15 other tight ends. So he's the type that, sure, should he be rostered? Yeah, but not someone that I'm really pining to get, and not someone that I'm going to lose sleep over at 2 a.m. hitting refresh, praying he hits my roster like I would with Hunter Henry.
Exactly. I think he's gotten a little more target share going in these past couple games. He's played 85% of the snaps. If you're looking for a streamer, if you've got somebody on bye in the next couple of weeks, if you've got Kelce on bye next week and you're just looking to pick somebody up a week early, I think Conklin's a viable play, but he's definitely not number 1 behind Henry and probably number 3 behind the next guy, Dan Arnold. How do you feel about Dan?
I think my friend Herms put it perfectly. What else do you need to see from Dan Arnold? Only 1 game since October with less than 8 targets. Only 1 game with less than 60 yards. You're looking at a position where Dan Arnold hasn't scored touchdowns, so the fantasy community has decided he's not good. Touchdowns are variable. What isn't variable is someone who's going to continuously catch passes. Some of those are going to eventually end up in the end zone. But when you have a guy in PPR leagues that is catching 5 to 8 passes for 60 yards, you're getting guaranteed double-digit production at the tight end position. We just talked about people are playing Conklin. Some of y'all are still playing Jonnu Smith. Some of you are hoping for Adam Troutman and Juwan Johnson to do something, and Dan Arnold's just sitting out there. It's insane to me that people can't look at this steady production and see what, honestly, is what I had hoped TJ Hawkinson was going to be. That's what you're getting out of Dan Arnold. 10 points without scoring a touchdown for tight ends is gold. Anytime he gets in the end zone, you're getting 16 points. He will be a top 5 tight end every time he scores and will be a top 10 tight end even if he doesn't. What else could you possibly want this man to do before you can pick him up? He is a smash play every single week.
Yeah, I feel like Urban Meyer is using Dan Arnold like he wanted to use Tim Tebow if Tebow wasn't 100 years old and couldn't block for shit. So, I mean, and I also think that a lot of people are biased against Arnold just because of the team that he plays on. They're like, oh, it's the Jags suck, blah, 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 blah. But if you fail to look at the targets and the snaps and the consistency and the production, you're really missing out on a solid floor tight end from week to week. So, all right, are you ready to get into these avoids?
Let's go ahead. Why don't you start with telling everybody why you want them to avoid this quarterback? I want to hear this personally. I think this is going to be fun.
Well, it's nothing against Tua. I have Tua as my first one. A big question over him and why I would pick somebody like Cam or Justin Fields over him is that he hasn't really been healthy this season. And it really puzzles me that he was healthy enough to come in relief of Jacoby Brissett against the Ravens, but he wasn't healthy enough to start. That's just, to me, that shows me that Miami has no confidence in him going down the stretch as their franchise quarterback. I mean, the Jets, I kind of brought that up earlier, that over the past 4 games, or they're only allowing 18.77 fantasy points per game. So like, he's a viable streamer. He's good, but I can't trust the Dolphins. And maybe it's PTSD from getting the donut from Gesicki last week, but I can't trust anybody on that Miami offense. I'm really sorry, Troy, if you're still listening, but I just can't do it. And I want to because I love Tua, but please persuade me otherwise because I really want to like him.
Absolutely. So let's take a look at why I like Tua Tagovailoa, and it has nothing to do with the player. Everything you said about the player is completely true. Why I like Tua personally is because he's playing the Jets, and the Jets have given up 14 passing touchdowns this season. Now, I know what you're thinking, 14. That's not great. Well, the cool part about it is they gave up 2 in the first 4 weeks. You know what that means? They've given up 12 in the last 4. They have been averaging 300 yards passing against them since week 5, 300 yards and basically 3 touchdowns a game. And I know what you're thinking. Well, clearly they played against all pros. That would be a problem. No, they played against Matt Ryan's corpse, Mac Jones, Joe Burrow, who has been wildly inconsistent, Carson Wentz, and then obviously Josh Allen, who just lit him up for 366 yards. This is a team who literally can't stop anybody through the air. They're completely off kilter, and you're looking at a floor of basically 250 and 2 touchdowns off the waiver wire. I'll take that every time.
Yeah, I don't think you're wrong. I just think there's a couple people with higher ceilings out there. But like we say everywhere in this avoid section, it's so late in the season. If there's no one better available, like sure, roll the dice on him, take who's out there. But he's not really someone that I personally want to pin like my championship hopes on, especially if you're, struggling to crack that playoff tier in your leagues.
Oh, I'm with you. This is basically just I need a guy for this week play. I agree that I'm not looking at him as my starter for weeks on end. I'm not looking at him as a play if my quarterback gets hurt. I would basically sign up to take every quarterback that plays the Jets for the rest of the year.
I like that. I think we can agree on that. But I mentioned championships. I'm curious if any of your leagues do anything fun for your fantasy football champion.
So the most fun that we have is in my eliminator, we have a very fun prize going out. So for anyone who's never played an eliminator, it's 17 teams. And basically 1 is left standing. The lowest score every week is eliminated from the league. So we will have one defined winner week 17. And for those of you who haven't been following me, I had one thing that kind of kickstarted my career here, and that happens to be trash talk. I write for Trophy Smack. I write for their Smack Zone. and I make trash talk videos, and they're not pleasant. They're not easy on people. I go at people's throats. I'm a Boston kid. You can hear from the accent. So the winner of my eliminator will be sending me the details of their league, and we'll be getting back a personalized video attacking every single one of their league mates and why the person who won our league is by far the smartest person in that league. So that will be disseminated out to their teams. That will be an absolute blast for anybody who wins it. And that's probably the most fun that we have with our leagues. How about you? Is there anything you guys do for fun in your leagues?
I love it. In our big money league, we're all bartenders / former bartenders. One of the championship trophy is a tap handle that you can fully hook up to any kind of beer. And so that person gets that all year long. The loser's trophy is a little cherub, and it just pees. So you can put anything in it. There have been several vodka shots done out of that cherub over the many years in this league. But the reason I asked is because you mentioned Trophy Smack. Trophy Smack has this really, really badass title belt, right? That just looks, I'm going to say badass again, but it looks badass. If you guys want one of those for your leagues, you can go online to trophysmack.com. Right now, if you order one of those belts and enter the promo code CIRCLE, you get a free ring that's valued at $60 along with that championship belt. And you can just have something cool that everybody is going to talk about. It's going to be a head turner conversation piece. Plus, it's like, I'm probably exaggerating, but it looks like it's 50 pounds. So that's badass in and of itself. All right. I think I've said badass enough right now.
I'm sure Matt and Trophy Smack will appreciate it.
Yes. But on to somebody who I think is not quite badass in the fantasy world for purposes of waivers is Mac Jones. I know that you're going to hate this, and this is not a personal attack. I think Matt Jones put up decent fantasy numbers this week. He's looked great as a rookie. He's probably the best rookie out of this class total so far this season. But I think his fantasy line is just a little bit deceiving. He threw for 3 touchdowns last week, but he only threw for 198 yards, and he hasn't thrown for over 200 yards in the past 2 games, almost 3, with week 8 only being 217. Taking the bias away, how do you feel about Mac Jones just as a fantasy option going forward?
All right, so there is a little bit of a problem with the stat you just gave, which is that Brian Hoyer came in and threw for 85 yards and a touchdown. It was a blowout, similar like we talked about with the Dallas game. So Mac Jones would have gone over for 200 yards. That said, I love Mac Jones as an NFL quarterback. I'm happy that he's the quarterback for my favorite team. But I agree with you in fantasy. Mac Jones is going to be asked to only do what is required to win football games. And when you look at this Matt Judon-led defense, when you look at this rushing attack that we touched upon earlier with Damian Harris, Ramondre Stevenson, Brandon Bolden, and the team really lighting it up, Mac Jones is being asked to basically play that game manager role and only hit the downfield targets when they're there. He had a dart to Kendrick Bourne last week, which was spectacular. I think the best is yet to come from Mac Jones, but yet to come is not this year. I think that you're going to see a Kirk Cousins-like fantasy quarterback in the coming years, which is a very startable player and someone to have on my roster. But for this year, you never know when the Patriots are going to just grind out a win. You never know when they're just going to run out the clock, and Mac Jones is going to be asked to only do the minimum amount to get them over the finish line. The Patriots' goal is not to give us fantasy points, but to win games. They are in the hunt now. They're obviously in the playoffs as it stands today, in the hunt for the AFC East Championship. So I think what you're going to see is very similar to Brady's first year, where he also wasn't fantasy viable. It's check downs, safe plays, don't lose the game. Make sure you're never giving him a short field. And that's not what you're looking for fantasy quarterback. So as much as I hate anything negative about Mac Jones, I can't argue that he's not fantasy viable right now.
Yeah, it sucks because I love his swag. I love everything about him, but I can't start him. Somebody else who I can't start, we're moving on to running backs right now, is Wayne Gallman. I feel like this Wayne Gallman thing is blown entirely out of proportion. You touched on it a little bit. I touched on it earlier about the blowout in the Cowboys game. Cordero Patterson got hurt, which I think heightened that roar. But how are you feeling about Gallman as a viable fantasy option?
So, one of the things that I always like to talk about with these particular situations is I put literally zero value into player usage. We'll talk about it later, Dave. Player usage during an in game injury. In game injuries don't always dictate what will happen the following week. So I think what people look at is the 15 carries that Gallman got in comparison to the 4 from Mike Davis. But as you touched upon, this game was a blowout. It was never in question. And they weren't game scripting to not have Cordell Patterson. Obviously, they expected to have him in that game. He was in that game prior to the high ankle sprain. Now, what you have is you have a short week, number one. You have a team that knows they're not going to have Cordell Patterson, even though he did practice in a limited fashion. I can't believe he's going to turn around a high ankle sprain in 4 days. And you have a team that realistically picked Mike Davis over Wayne Gallman in free agency. People forget this, that Mike Davis signed before Wayne Gallman. Why wouldn't you think that Mike Davis is going to get first crack at it? Number one. Number two, why would you care? This team is going to have to throw the ball in every game because they're horrific. So what do you really think you're getting out of Wayne Gallman other than mediocre performance? Much like we talked about with Ramondre Stevenson being in your flex, if you're playing Wayne Gallman, you're not playing for the trophy smack belt. You're just playing to avoid the toilet seat at this point. That's all you're going for because your team is garbage. So Wayne Gallman has no ceiling whatsoever given the situation. Patterson's already trying to give it a go, practicing limited. You're talking 1 week of maybe 15 carries for 40 yards. You can have it. I'll play a wide receiver instead.
Yeah, that's absolutely my take on it. I mean, the Falcons put in Josh Rosen, for God's sake. They didn't even put in Felipe Franks. Like Josh Rosen, I didn't even realize he was still in the league. It's that bad. It was just, yeah. Don't, if you have any fab left, please save it. Don't spend it on Gallman. This one's a little more polarizing, though. Donta Foreman.
Mm-hmm.
So he's still only rostered in 1.7% of ESPN leagues, meaning that people don't really like that backfield in Tennessee. Even though it seems like Foreman is taken over as the lead back, I mean, I don't think that's one you really want to touch. He played 35% of the snaps while Peterson played 33 and McNichols played 27. Like, it's a true running back by committee. And Freeman's also inefficient. He got 2.7 yards per carry on 11 touches. I mean, I think his appeal is against the Texans, but with a running back by committee split that's basically a third, I mean, how are you going to trust a guy like this?
You're not. I think that realistically the only person in this backfield I'd even consider is Adrian Peterson, just because we know what he can be as a talent if he ever did take the reins. But I think realistically what you're looking at is like a poor man's Devonta Freeman type output when Latavius Murray comes back. It's going to be a split, and you're only going to be getting those rushes, not really getting targets, not really doing much with them. And watching the man play, it's like the game went in slow motion. Like, you don't see a burst. I don't see any particular skills that I think, oh, if he just knocks off the rust, he'll really take off. I think that honestly, Peterson is still the premier talent in this backfield. And even with Peterson, you're not comfortable starting him. This is a non-factor for me. Ryan Tannehill is still one of the better goal line running quarterbacks. We're seeing him score a lot in the rushing game. So I don't know what you're hoping for out of Freeman, but it's probably not good. And much like we said about Gallman, you're not a winner if that's who you're playing. Yeah,
it's just icky back there. I can't trust anybody in that kind of split in a committee. So if anybody has any other questions, send them out. We'll make sure to answer them because we're getting close to the end of the broadcast. Let's move on to wide receivers. Bryan Edwards. He finally had some kind of stat line and people are all over him. What are your feelings on Brian Edwards?
Brian Edwards is a lot of take luck. This is a guy who has shown flashes. People wanted him to be something. There was a lot of talk about him being more talented than Henry Ruggs, even though Ruggs was taken before him. And now that Ruggs obviously is no longer on the team, people are thinking, well, now Edwards is the number one, which he isn't. It is Darren Waller. We should all be aware of that by now. And Derek Carr, I'm aging myself here. Derek Carr spreads the ball out considerably. 4 targets just isn't enough for Brian Edwards. He does look strong doing it. He has that Terrell Owens look that I know he got the comp for. I promise you, he just looks like him. He is not Terrell Owens, not even close. He's a borderline wide receiver 5-6 in fantasy. Not someone I care about, not someone I need. There's actually a player on this list I like a lot better than Brian Edwards. And I'm guessing you can figure out who it is because you know who my team is. So
You're not a homer at all.
not even a little bit.
This isn't the Homer show, guys. I promise. But honestly, you're exactly right. Edwards played 80% of snaps last week. He still only saw 4 targets. He's only seen 4 targets in the past 4 games each. I mean, you would think with the uptick in target vacation that he would see a little bit more, but I mean, he just hasn't. And I'm not going to go out and spin fab or blow my waiver priority on somebody who just posted a stat line last week. That said, we have another guy who finally posted a stat line last week after people dropped him, after all the frustration. That's Robbie Anderson. We kind of talked about Cam, did he make Robbie Anderson relevant? Mike, take this one.
No. What could you possibly be thinking? Robbie Anderson has done less with targets this year than anybody possibly in NFL history. And you want to pick him up. Why? Because he had 37 yards and one of them happened to be in the end zone, thrown from Cam Newton, who basically only threw for 2,000 yards total as a Patriot last year. He's not the most talented receiver on his team. They're a run-heavy team. He's the third option. And what he's shown is his hands are completely gone. I can't imagine what would make you think this is a Robbie Anderson type play. This is embarrassing. Robbie Anderson is not a fantasy viable player whatsoever. I don't care how deep your roster is. I don't care if it's in 15 team league with 40 players in it. Robbie Anderson shouldn't be in your starting lineup.
No, this is it's that recency bias. Everyone's like, oh, Cam, there's something different. Darnold's gone. PJ Walker's gone. Cam's back. It's going to be like old times. No, it's not. The Panthers offense runs through Christian McCaffrey and Newton. And even though we got a different coach, the system's a little bit different, the talent on that team has not changed.
And they're not a good offense.
No. And if you have a different system, but the same players, and you only have a couple, highly talented players, the situation's not going to change. Nothing's going to get better. Please don't buy into that hype. I wish them all the best in their friendship and their endeavors, but please don't sit on my fantasy roster. So I'm going to let you take this next one because this is obviously one that's polarizing to us.
Perfect. Yeah, we're going to talk about my man, Kendrick Bourne. So what we're talking about is I love having the show sheet. What I love is when I have the show sheet, I know what you're going to say. And you're going to talk about his snap percentage, which is great because the Patriots are rolling out 12 personnel, having 2 stud tight ends. And what they also have is 3 of the best blocking wide receivers in the NFL in Jacoby Myers, Nelson Aguilar, and N'Keal Harry. Crap on your first round talent all you want. The guy's a great blocker. So what you're talking about when you look at snap share is he's still getting out there running routes, and he's running those intermediate routes that the Patriots offense feeds off of. And what he is doing with it is nothing short of spectacular. This is a guy who throughout his career has always been a talent. It's just a question of whether he can stay healthy. And now you're looking at a healthy Kendrick Bourne and see what he can do. 4 for 98 and a touchdown last week. One was on an absolute dart. 4 for 34 the week before. He had 7 catches against the Chargers, 4 for 68. He has come alive. He is a lot like what we talked about with Dan Arnold. He is doing it more efficiently. He's not quite getting the target share that you want to see, but also what he's getting are targets that are high completion percentage targets. They're putting him in positions where he's open, and Mac Jones is a highly efficient quarterback. So this is a guy where he can do more with less, and he is a threat to take it to the house. He is a talented person. So what I like about him is in PPR, you're really looking at a floor of 7 to 10 with that possibility of the 16 to 20. I like those players when I'm looking for those lower level flex plays. So I do not think this is fool's gold. I think if Kendrick Bourne is healthy, he is somebody who can get on your roster. He is somebody who can make plays, and he's somebody that I'm banking on as being a wide receiver 3-4 type player coming into some heavy bye weeks we have coming up.
Let me ask you this. Does the game script change your mind at all going against the Falcons, where you think they can get up early and then just run people like Harris, Stevenson, possibly Bolden? I mean, does that change your mind just for this week about his usage?
Not really, because I think that you're always going to need to make some passes. You're always going to need to make some throws. And I think that Belichick has faith in Mac Jones not to make a mistake. So I don't think you're ever going to see them completely shut down from the pass. Not to mention, I don't think this Patriots team is really good enough to consistently do what they did against Cleveland. We've only seen it once before this year, which was the Jets game. And I think on a Thursday night, it's really hard to believe you're ever going to see a blowout. I mean, when do we see Thursday night games that you see one offense coming out flying? I mean, they tend to be closer, grinded out games just by definition, just by the short week that we have. So I don't think the Patriots are going to come out and blow the doors off the Falcons. Of course, I think they're going to win, but it is in Atlanta. It is a short week, and this Patriots offense certainly hasn't clicked in every game the way that it has against the Cleveland Browns. So I don't look at the Patriots as one of those teams where I worry about fourth quarter sits. I mean, they're not the Chiefs, right? They're not that high-powered offense. I think realistically, they're a team who the Falcons will hang around just enough that they'll be running a standard offense for most, if not all, of the game.
Yeah, I can see that. Oh, it's just so tough. The numbers, the snap share just really, really scares me. But we'll see. We'll see. Snap share doesn't mean anything. I'm just too conservative. All right. So we did get a comment. Toronto Dave said, I wish I came prepared with paper and a pen to take notes. You guys can rewatch the show. It's on our YouTube channel, FF Intervention. It's on Facebook at the Fantasy Football Discussion, and it's on Twitter under FF Intervention. I'm tagged Britt_Flinn, and Mike will be tagged in this one as well at Daddy's Home FF. So if you want to rewatch the show, there are 3 ways to do it. All right, jumping into tight ends. I've got Austin Hooper here. I've been trying to talk people out of anybody on this Cleveland pass catching core the entire season, and nobody will listen to me. How do you feel about Austin Hooper?
I mean, people actually have Austin Hooper in fantasy. That's a thing.
He was very high on a lot of the tight end waiver today because of his stat line last week, and I don't know why. It's another example of the stat line being deceiving.
Yeah, it's another example of why you should only follow a set number of people on Twitter. It's lazy analysis. I mean, what could you have possibly seen from Austin Hooper during these series of games, during his time where he has 24 catches for 200 yards, that makes you think, oh, this is the time for Austin Hooper? He had 25 yards, and yes, he had a touchdown. Also, David Njoku, who had been their go-to tight end, had a horrific drop. And when you look at a game that is 40, 5 to 7, why would you look at that game and say, oh, I'm going to use this as the blueprint to project out for games to come? Your quarterback got hurt. Your pride got hurt. Your team got embarrassed. People realize you're not actually good. I'm sorry, Cleveland, you're not. You can't take a blowout game and use that as a template to project going forward. That's lazy analysis, and that's where people end up disappointed. This is a guy who is more like what we saw in Cincinnati, when he's 2 for 14, what we saw in Denver, 3 for 42, Arizona, 3 for 4 yards. Pittsburgh, 6 for 26 was a big game for Austin Hooper. He hasn't gone over 50 yards in 2 months. I mean, why? Why? When Dan Arnold's out there, why are you looking at Austin Hooper?
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. It's, for lack of a better word, it's lazy analysis. You're looking at the points. You're not looking at the targets. You're not looking at the catches. You're not looking at the yards. You're looking at the points that were created by a touchdown. It's the same reason why Wayne Gallman's on here, right? It's just lazy analysis. You didn't watch the game. You didn't see what went on. You didn't even look at the box score of the game. Probably you just looked on your app and said, oh, this guy had the most points. I'm going to go with him. Like, no, please don't do it. Please don't.
So here's what I'll tell you. As someone that watched every snap of that game, I didn't even notice he was on the field. I forgot he scored because it didn't matter. It was, an early touchdown, very early, kind of just fluke play. He was open. And that was the last you heard his name. He disappeared. I forgot that it happened. It was it was first drive that he scored. And then we had so much fun after that. No one even paid attention. But I don't remember hearing his name. I didn't see anything highlight film. There were no times when you looked at the replay and said, oh, he should have thrown to Austin Hooper because he was wide open. Like Tyler Lockett's a perfect example of that. Tyler Lockett's stat line was straight trash this week. Tyler Lockett should have had a monster game. If Russell Wilson could throw the ball, Tyler Lockett would have had 7 catches for 150 yards and 2 touchdowns. He had 27 yards. So everyone's saying Tyler Lockett, fade all these box score analysts, Austin Hooper up. It couldn't be further from the truth. It's the exact opposite. Watch the game and tell me which plays Austin Hooper was on, because I can't tell you. I didn't see him on the field, didn't see him getting open. He was dominated by the New England Patriots. Yeah,
agreed. The next guy on our list is kind of the same thing, right? Gerald Everett. Everybody is suddenly obsessed with him. Like, yeah, Russell Wilson's back, but Russell's long ball didn't look accurate. It's obvious that he still has issues with the finger. So I think that's why he checked down to Everett so much. With another week, I think that Wilson is going to be back to more form, throwing more to Lockett and Metcalf, and Everett's going to be a thing of the past. I mean, am I wrong?
No, this one crushes me because I actually did have high hopes for Everett coming into the season. I did think he was going to be a thing. Russell Wilson did not have it. He had no confidence. He had no accuracy, like we just talked about with Lockett. He couldn't hit him. DK Metcalf threw a tantrum twice and got thrown out of the game. There's a lot to take away from this Seattle game, and none of it is pick up Gerald Everett. All of it is when Russell Wilson gets right, Tyler Lockett is back to being the wide receiver one that we saw earlier in the year. All of it is around that Russell Wilson probably shouldn't have been playing in this game. It very possibly cost his team a win by going out there. It's quite clear his finger isn't right. And until it is, you can't trust anybody in Seattle, Russell Wilson included. But none of this should lead you to Gerald Everett is a viable tight end. He's not even an option in this offense. They were looking at Swaim more. They were looking at Everett. It became a necessity because Russell Wilson was trying to survive a football game where he clearly did not have the Russell Wilson hand. He did not have the accuracy. And once he does, Gerald Everett will be a thing of the past again. This is a guy who has 160 of his 198 yards in 3 games. You want to play Russian roulette like that? This is a guy who's a 0 more often than anything else. I'm out.
Yeah, no way. No way am I picking up Everett. Again, Check to see if Hunter Henry's in your leagues. Why is he available in so many leagues?
That's silly. Hunter Henry being available is, like we talked about, that's just borderline insanity.
Yeah.
But any of the guys we talked about above are leaps and bounds better than these two.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So our final section tonight is the gems. Who do we think that you should pick up that people aren't really talking about and could go on to win you your league as we enter the playoff push? The first one I have is Godwin Igua Bukay. He's the backup for Detroit. He's only rostered in 0.1% of ESPN leagues. I know that this sounds crazy. He didn't get a lot of work with 2 carries. But holy hell, did he make those 2 carries count? 56 yards and a touchdown. And he did all this after Jamar Jefferson was carted off Sunday with an ankle injury. Jefferson came back to practice today, but then left early, leaving his status really in doubt. So if Jamal Williams doesn't play and Jamar Jefferson doesn't play, I mean, Igua Bukay is the number 2 behind DeAndre Swift. I mean, he's going to get work. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, obviously in the gem section, you're really talking about deep sleepers, deep leagues. We're not talking about guys in the category of AJ Dillon or Ramondre Stevenson like we talked about above. But yeah, he popped on that run. I mean, this is a 27-year-old fourth-year player. Excuse me. This is not a rookie who came out of nowhere. This isn't somebody that we don't know about. So it has fluke potential. But this is a team that's not going to let Jared Goff throw the ball if they can avoid it. This is a team that is going to feed the running backs, and the running back 2 in Detroit is going to get enough touches to potentially be valuable. I'd put him below Wayne Gallman on my pickups, just because at least we know what we're getting with Gallman. But yeah, I think he's interesting. He could be worth nothing by the time the injury report comes out on Wednesday, but why not take a shot? If you're in one of those 35, 40-man roster leagues, why not? Like Jamie talked about, he still has Rager on his team. Hell, throw a dart if that's the best you can get. I do think this will end up being nothing, but if Williams and Jefferson end up out, sure, he might be a quick save for that really deep flex league.
Yeah, and he's probably also a pivot. You don't necessarily, or not even necessarily, you don't have to put in a waiver claim on him tonight because probably nobody in your league is going to be after him. I would use him as like a contingency plan. If you don't get who you try to get, then go pick him up when he's just a click and drop situation, you know? And then if the injury situation comes out tomorrow and Jefferson and Williams are playing, then, you know, nothing lost. So I kind of like it. This one isn't quite as deep of a gem, but Marcus Johnson has become like the wide receiver 2 in Tennessee. He did more than AJ Brown last week, which is kind of crazy. Mm-hmm. I don't know if he's going to continue to do that. I think it was kind of a fluke with AJ Brown, but with Julio on IR, I mean, he's looking like he's the number 2 option in Tennessee. So what are your thoughts on that?
So what kills me here is with Julio going on IR, I would love to know why Josh Reynolds asked for his release. We should be talking about Josh Reynolds on this show. But now we're not, and we're talking about Marcus Johnson. I worry about his production. I worry about their usage of the wide receiver. I worry that they won't end up pivoting back to like a Fersker or looking more at the tight end position, or possibly using AJ Brown a lot like you see Cooper Kupp used in the Rams, where there's very little to go around otherwise. I understand putting him in the gem section. I understand taking a deep dart throw on him. The guy that I actually prefer, who is a little deeper at this point based on what I've seen, is DeAndre Carter, is a player I'd probably pick up over Marcus Johnson. but they're very close for me in terms of guys that I'm looking at for my very, very deep leagues. So if I don't hit on Carter and I get Johnson, I won't be miserable about it, but I will be hoping I get a DeAndre Carter, who I think has shown more in the past 2 games than I expect from Johnson. But again, all this tells me that it just makes me sad is why did Josh Reynolds leave? We were finally going to get to see what he could do in a good offense, and now he is off to inevitability in Trashville. And enjoy your day, friend. But Johnson, sure, he's fine, but not a guy that I'm going crazy over. It's if I get him, great, but he would probably be because I missed out on my first 3 or 4 options.
Yeah, Reynolds has been Thanos into dust.
Yep.
It's so sad. But I think we're at the end of our show. So I'm so happy you could join us. This was so much fun. Can you tell everybody who's still watching where to find you and where to find your work?
Absolutely. At Daddy's Home FF on Twitter. You can usually find me talking trash to somebody on there and making jokes. I promise it's all in fun. You can find my show, Hanging with Daddy, on Dynasty League Football, DLF for short. Anyone who's a Dynasty player should be a member. If you are not subscribing to DLF, we're doing our Black Friday special right now. Hit me up. I can get you a really good deal, about half off your normal subscription. And then you can find all my Trash Talk articles on Trophy Smacks, Smack Zone. Me, Chase Vernon, Cooter Doodle, and Thomas Triple are the people making that happen. And we're just having fun. You might not get a ton of valuable football information, but you'll have a lot of fun. So catch us there. And yeah, hit me up on Twitter. Any questions? I try to get back to everybody. If I don't answer you, I promise I didn't see it. But I do this to try to help people. So hit me up. Let me know. I'm always happy to help you. And so thrilled we finally got to go do a show together. I'm so happy to be here for your first hosting gig. You were absolutely amazing. Thank you for having me on.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, this was a blast. So just make sure you guys follow me at Britt_Flinn on Twitter. Follow Mike. Come back and see us next week because the week 12 waiver wire. Chase should be back next week, depending if he has more adventures to go on. But same time, same place, same website. Thank you for letting us intervene with your fantasy football lives.